G'day humans, welcome to We the People Live. I'm Josh Zepps. It's been a long and interesting week of ups and downs since Donald Trump became the president-elect of these fine United States of America, and I haven't really had an opportunity to talk to you, mano a mano, or mano a womano. Since then, there are a couple of things that I want to get off my chest and help us think through together before we get to the meat of today's conversation, which is a really interesting, albeit wonky, discussion. But I think the times serve a bit of wonk, don't they? In the past week, I've seen a lot of writing about the election. Well, of course. And I've seen a lot of analyses and a lot of what I think is bad use of data. There was a piece that was circulating by The Guardian breaking down all of the demographics that have voted for Trump and didn't vote for Trump and what Latinos did and what black people did and what the millennial turnout was. It tempted one to start thinking about the election as kind of a big swing towards Trump. And I'm not a big narrative guy. I don't like drawing massive arm-waving conclusions from things that... I think most of what happens in life is just shit happens, and we shouldn't make too much of it, and we shouldn't draw resounding conclusions from things that were essentially arbitrary. So I'd just like to point out a couple of things about the data here and the math about the election and Trump's mandate. And none of what I'm about to say is intended to detract from the fact that Trump is the duly elected president-elect of the United States. This is not sour grapes pointing out that, Hillary got the popular vote, therefore she should be the one in the White House. There is a conversation to be had about the Electoral College and how undemocratic that is, but that's a conversation for another day. I'm saying this simply to get an understanding of where America's head is at right now. 27% of American eligible voters voted for Donald Trump. He got roughly the same number of votes, it looks like a few less, than Mitt Romney did. So basically, he performed the way that you would expect a generic Republican to perform. What happened was that Republicans came out and voted. Not in particularly large numbers. They voted the same way they did for Romney, even though there are more Americans. So he got slightly less of a share of the overall potential votes that he might have gotten. Hillary got 5 million fewer votes than Obama. Yes, she won the popular vote, but people didn't come out and vote for Hillary Clinton. So we can pass all we want of all the different little, slice it up. How did Latinos vote? How did these people vote? Oh, wow, he won all of these states in the Midwest. He swept the Rust Belt. Well, did he? Or did Hillary just lose? She just failed to seal the deal. I had underestimated the extent to which this would be a change election. But the idea that you can put up someone as status quo-y and insidery as Hillary Clinton and expect her to sweep into power was mistaken. And the idea that Pennsylvania would be just, 1% against her, and Wisconsin would be just 1% against her, and Michigan would be just 1% against her, the stars sort of have to align for you if you're Donald Trump. This was not a foregone conclusion. I really think that you could roll the dice over again and you would get a slightly different result. James Comey could come out and do it, could not come out, and you would get a different result. Trump could have not had his Twitter taken away from him a few days beforehand, and you would get a different result. California has gone huge for Clinton. New York went very well for Clinton. It looks like Donald Trump will get the lowest popular vote of any successful president in the history of the United States. And it looks like Hillary Clinton will win the popular vote with the fewest number of counties ever. I thought this was a really interesting stat. It looks like Hillary Clinton is going to win fewer than 500 counties. Barack Obama won 700 counties, and all of the data wonks slapped their foreheads and said, oh my goodness, only 700 counties in the entire United States? That's unprecedented. That's nothing for someone who's winning the popular vote. Hillary Clinton will have resoundingly won the popular vote with 200 fewer counties than Obama. Why is that relevant? Because it just goes to show how she is very successful in big cities with concentrated populations, and just woefully unsuccessful at connecting with people in rural and regional America. This will raise all kinds of conversations about the bubble, about how people like me are living inside a bubble. All the liberals, all the coastal liberal elites, not understanding the reality of America, the heartland of America. To which I say, yes, that's true. It's also true the fucking heartland doesn't understand us and doesn't care about us. The bubble works both ways. Our bubble includes education and college and literature and open-mindedness and travel and conversations about the way that other countries do things and evidence and science. And the other bubble entails mostly living within 50 miles of where you were born and doing things the way that you know. So you tell me which bubble is the more insular one. I confess to living in an internationalist, elitist bubble. But I don't think that that means that we should pass the buck and give a free pass to people who choose to live in an even more insular bubble and then treat them like they're the real America. And people like me, the melting pot people, who've created this country ever since its founding by coming here and choosing to be here, that our bubble is somehow more insular just because we didn't think that Trump would pull off what now, even with the benefit of hindsight, still seems like an unlikely triumph for him. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning is Islam and social justice warriors and so on. I know that a lot of you agree with my frustrations about the way that the left treats conversations around minorities. The fact that the day after the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris, where cartoonists were brutally assassinated, Howard Dean, when asked about it on MSNBC, the chairman of the Democratic Party, said, "Oh, these guys are about as Muslim as I am." They're not Muslims. And this constant refrain from the left, that there is nothing to worry about at the fringe of Islam. Like that whole conversation, I completely empathize with the need to start having conversations with one another that are not so politically correct. But I don't think that, and it's entirely possible that, for example, the reason why Latinos didn't come out in as strong a way for Hillary Clinton as we might have expected was because they are concerned about terrorism. There is some polling evidence, some exit polling evidence, that a certain cohort of people who ended up voting for Trump were just fed up with the way that the left has responded to terrorism, and they were basically afraid of Muslim immigration. I don't think it's the correct solution to be banning people on the basis of their religion. I think the best way to fight Islam, radical Islam, is to allow moderate Muslims into the country. And that the best ally that we'll have in the 21st century in the fight against terrorism is going to be a large, happy, well-educated, prosperous American Muslim community to counter the propaganda that's coming out of places like ISIS. And I think it feeds into ISIS's narrative to elect a person who sees the world as being split into the good non-Muslims and the bad, dangerous Muslims. I think that's very dangerous. It's exactly what ISIS wants the rest of the world to believe. If you're a young, impressionable Muslim person growing up in South Asia, and ISIS is saying there's nothing that you can do to win over the West, they will always hate you fundamentally. They might speak a good game about human rights, but fundamentally they're always going to hate you. And the great Satan elects Donald Trump. Well, what are you going to think? Sort of vindicates ISIS's narrative, doesn't it? So I don't think that he was the right answer, but I do think that the reason why he won may be partly because of the left's failure to have an honest conversation about the civil war that's going on at the fringe of Islam and the need for us to reckon with it and treat it as a legitimate security concern. The other thing that I think is interesting that's worth raising is that Trump and Obama were both change candidates and that they both made white people feel better about racial anxiety. I think this is counterintuitive, but is one of the more interesting insights that I've picked up over the last week. That Obama made white people feel better about racial anxiety because they felt proud of voting for a black person. In a weird way, Trump made the same people also feel better about their racial anxiety because he was saying to them, you guys aren't crazy. You're not nuts for noticing that America is changing and for being uneasy about the ways in which it's changing. And that doesn't necessarily make you racist, even though the social justice left would insist that you are. And I think that the failure, again, of all of the big failures of the left in this campaign, from Islam to talking about working class values, one of the biggies, and you saw it at the Democratic National Convention, which was this big, proud cavalcade of inclusiveness, one of the big failures was to simply sweep under the carpet any concern about demographic change, any cultural anxiety in the United States, and to say that anybody who shares any anxiety about that is by definition racist. And the racists said, fuck you, and went for Trump. Not just the racists, anyone who is at all concerned about cultural and demographic shifts. people with cultural anxiety. White people. Elderly white people, mostly. Millennials didn't come out to vote. If this was a battle between elderly white people trying to cling to one vision of America and millennials trying to push a new, more inclusive, more diverse version of America, then millennials just didn't bother. They didn't bother fighting the fight. The lack of millennial support, of millennial engagement in this election also brings us to the point of Bernie. Would Bernie have done it? I must say, I've been feeling a little bit of regret for having been as dismissive as I was of Bernie, given the fact that Hillary Clinton didn't manage to pull it off. But I've got to say, it hasn't changed my view that I don't think Bernie could have pulled it off either. I mean, if you have for a start, Mike Bloomberg probably would have gotten into the race and it probably would have been a three-way race. But even just putting that aside and imagining that it was just Bernie v. Trump, yeah, millennials would have come out, so he would have done much better in all of those urban areas which Hillary Clinton already won. I mean, maybe he would have won the popular vote too. But would suburban, white, working-class people in the suburbs of Cincinnati have voted for a northeastern, rumpled old Jewish socialist who declares himself to be a socialist and who wants to raise taxes? I mean, maybe I'm completely wrong. I've gotten everything else wrong about Trump's ascendancy. But it just strikes me to the core that if you've got two old white northeastern guys who are both change agents, and one of them wants to blame everything that's wrong with the country on the fact that there are too many illegal people pouring in, and there are too many crazy Muslims blowing shit up, there are too many bad trade deals, and what we need to do is cut taxes and unleash the innovation of the American economy and bring America back to the era in which it was best. And the other change agent is saying, I want to raise your taxes and turn you into Denmark. Again, it's still a tough sell. I do think that Bernie's ideas, that a change agent peddling Bernie's ideas, who is a lot younger than Bernie and a lot more attractive than Bernie, and plays better in middle America, will come along and will change this country. And if there is any upside to Trump's election, it's that this is a shot across the bow. And this is a moment for change. This is a fissure in history. In the days after the election, a lot of people on social media were asking me why I seemed to be reacting in such a hysterical way, posting things about articles about how terrible this was, when I should be more measured, because they would like me to be more nuanced. And I had to respond, nuance doesn't always mean taking a middle road and not being passionate. Sometimes the nuanced thing to do is to freak your shit out. And one of the reasons why I was freaking my shit out is because this is a genuine break in history. The train of history has been trundling along, and every 4 years it sort of stops at a station, and you decide whether it's going to go onto track A or track B, and sometimes it goes onto a different track, and over time it ends up going to a slightly different location. But at each point in time, it's sort of just taking a little V. It's either veering off in one direction or it's veering off in another direction. And like 9/11, I think last week the train just completely shot off the rails and smashed through the rail guards, and now we're in uncharted territory. We don't really know how this untested, inexperienced, uninformed, uninterested in policy guy who has spent his life scamming people and not being a particularly good businessman, but putting on a good show on reality TV and by slapping his name on buildings, how he is going to lead the world. Maybe he'll be great, but he's certainly not going to be the same. He's certainly not going to be more of the same. And maybe that opens up a clearing in which the left can step into after he fails. Or again, maybe he'll be brilliant. It is worth noting that not a single living president voted for him. And if you need to be reminded of the reasons why one might be concerned, he has all kinds of interests. I mean, he owes $300 million to Deutsche Bank, which is currently trying to settle with the federal government over what happened during the financial crisis. Whether or not he is going to maintain a firewall between his own personal interests and what the Justice Department does remains to be seen. I see no evidence to imagine that he would, to imagine that he respects the separation of powers and respects them so much that he is willing to sacrifice his own personal gain in order to uphold ideals that he regards as being abstract and that he often doesn't even seem to understand. When he criticized the judge who was investigating Trump University, that just betrays a misunderstanding of the way in which the executive is supposed to respect the judiciary. I mean, when he tweets about how terrible the New York Times is, even after having won the election, the idea that a president-elect is launching public broadsides against one of the most important media companies in the country. These are taboos that he either is unaware of or just willingly blows straight through. So that provides me with the suspicion that he is also going to blow through whatever other taboos, especially if they're just behind the scenes and the things that we don't know about. If he has real estate interests, for example, that are going to be favored or not favored by certain actions of the federal government, whether that's the federal government renting out one of the buildings that he has a dealing with in Washington, D.C., or whether it's giving favorable treatment to a bank, or whatever else that might be. That is all just the kind of mild whiff of corruption stuff that I think is likely to go on behind the scenes. Then there's all the policy stuff. I mean, there's clearly going to be nothing done about climate chaos. We are at a precipice where storms are getting stronger and stronger. They're getting more and more frequent. Droughts are getting more and more widespread. The monsoons are getting fucked up. The glaciers are melting. We can see this unfolding in real time like a slow-motion train wreck. And this is going to have enormous, quite apart from the human costs, enormous financial costs. We are going to be paying a lot more for water. We're going to have battles between states here in the United States over water rights, let alone conflicts around the world and destabilization across the Middle East as food prices spike. All of this stuff is getting worse, and they're going to be doing absolutely nothing. Not only are they going to be doing nothing about climate change, they're going to be actively increasing America's climate emissions by tearing apart regulations and reversing President Obama's executive orders about pollution from coal-fired power plants, and probably giving a lot of money to the coal industry and defunding research into renewable energies. So, I mean, that's just one policy area. Then you think about foreign policy, and I don't know, is it going to be isolationist? Is it going to be interventionist? Is it going to be some weird combination of the two? It's certainly not going to be prudent. It looks like we might have Giuliani in a senior position who has no foreign policy experience. Then you think about health insurance. If he actually is going to rip up Obamacare, then that's 22 million people who currently have health insurance. What happens when they want to go and see a doctor? What happens if they get diabetes? What happens if they get pregnant? What happens if they get cancer? Then you think about financial regulation. Obviously, they're going to rip up any restrictions on Wall Street, which makes it more likely that a 2008 is going to happen again. This is just a huge slate of terrible ideas being pursued in the background by a man who has no experience in policy and no interest in policy, and no understanding of the world order as it was established after the Second World War. I've been yakking on about this before the election. I'm not going to stop yakking on about it now, not because I'm a sore loser, but because I want us to remain vigilant. Like, whatever side of politics you come from, at least join me in this mission, that we're not going to allow a new normal to get set up. Let's just be clear about the things that we value about America right now. I know this is a change election, and boy, will it change. But sort of a low-level acclamation to new shittiness is how autocracies evolve and how they come into being and how they sustain themselves. Don't normalize dread. Just favor outrage. Let's just have a pact to resist normalization. So take stock of what it is that you want to protect about America, articulate what it is that you fear being undermined, and just commit to remaining vigilant about respecting what was good about the old normal. And maybe this will all sound hysterical when you listen back on it in 2 years, and America will be a place of greater civil rights, greater liberty, greater self-empowerment, and everyone will feel free to get their freak on as much as they want to. But if it is slightly more of a police state, and slightly more brutal and slightly more harsh and slightly more mean, then whatever side of politics you're on, don't allow yourself to slide into an acceptance of a new normal. Unless you want to, unless you're choosing to. But I think that the most important thing right now is for us all to be as independent of mind as possible and to not hunker down into groupthink. If ever there was a time when the mission of this show is valid and is worth taking to heart, the mission of making debate healthy again, of not thinking inside of preset political boxes, but of picking and choosing your own truth on the basis of reality as you see it and of what's important in life as you see it, now is that time. It should be possible for you to both be frustrated with the excesses of social justice warriors on the left and also hate Trump's rhetoric and what he is doing. This whole idea that we have to choose an off-the-shelf team to be part of is part of what has gotten us into the problem we're in. And I do regard this as being a genuine problem. I'm not one of these people who thinks, well, we have to give Trump a chance. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm giving him a chance in the sense that I would be perfectly willing to support him if he ditched all of the policies that he ran on and ceased to be the person that he is. In that sense, I'm open-minded, but I'm not so open-minded that my brain's going to fall out. This is a 70-year-old guy who's been campaigning on exactly the same policies for the past 18 months. He flip-flops a bit around the edges, but you know the core of what his gist is, and the core of his gist is essentially hatred and nostalgia and incompetence dressed up with supreme confidence. That is not something that I'm going to keep an open mind about. So the challenge going forward is going to be how to hold accountable an administration that is really likely to be the worst administration that we've seen, certainly in my lifetime, without prejudging everything before they even do it, simply because we're being partisan. I'm not going to be partisan to any particular party. I'm not going to be partisan to any particular movement, but I am going to be partisan to the facts. And I'm going to be partisan to my vision and my core of what matters and what's right. And Trump don't represent that. One of the best lines that I've heard this past week was that Trump voters took him seriously, but not literally, whereas journalists took him literally, but never seriously. I'm going to take him seriously from now on.